This is Marty Wilson speaking. I'm sitting here with Jim Werkheiser. We're at the Monroe County Historical Association. We're here to talk to Jim because he's been a lifelong resident of Monroe County. We want to know what life was like in Monroe County back in the day, so to speak. So Jim, would you start by telling us where you were born, when you were born, your parents, those kinds of things?
Okay, I was born May 15th, 1930, and it was in the home of my Grammy Werkheiser. And my parents, I was always confused. They were married on May the 14th and I was born May the 15th. Wait a minute. But fortunately it was a year later, a year and a day later. My parents rented the second story of a garage on Stadden Road, which is now Stadden Road in Pocono Township, and no heat in this place, no running water.
This is 1930?
1930. I did not enjoy indoor plumbing until age 19.
How about that?
That meant the outhouse. But cold as sin in those days. There was no heat. You had a kerosene heater. I slept in the winter. I crawled in bed with my parents for warmth. You'd get up in the morning and in the sink, the water would be frozen. But it was brutal. 15, 20 degrees below zero was not unusual in those days. But we lived there until age 6, and then they moved into the town of Tannersville, the big town. And they rented until, well, that would have been from age 6 until age 19. They rented. Again, no indoor facilities.
Electricity, I'm assuming.
Pardon?
Electricity?
Yes, we had electricity, that we did.
And you had running water, apparently, right? Yeah.
Well, the first 6 years when we were renting from the Staddens, pump outside, which was interesting in the winter also.
It was outside.
Yeah. The 30s, Depression years. We didn't realize it. We were poor when the Depression started. We were poor during the Depression, and when it ended, we were still poor. So we didn't realize what effect the Depression had on the country. It was just the Depression years. Some things in the 30s, I was always interested in sports, even as a kid, but there were three things in the 1930s that convinced me would never end. Number one, Franklin Roosevelt would always be president of the United States. Number two, Joe Louis would always be the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. And number three, the New York Yankees would always be the world champions, because this was the years of Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, followed by Joe DiMaggio and so forth. Those things would never end. And through the 30s, that was true. They never ended.
What did your parents do for?
Okay, my parents.
What was
I was raised by my dad.
Okay.
Because he could not find work. I was 8 years old before he found a steady job. So he raised me. Now, Mom was able to work at the old Trox Pocono Hotel in Tannersville. Apparently the Depression didn't bother the rich folks. They still came to the Poconos for their summer vacation. So she would work all summer, or spring, summer, and fall. And then she also would clean houses. She was I don't know what you call it, go once or twice a week and straighten up the house for people who could afford it. So she was really the money maker, and Dad raised me. The thing I most remember was my meals were always the same: hot dogs and baked beans.
No kidding.
Every meal, and breakfast was always cold cereal.
Did you have brothers, sisters?
Now, my sister was born 12 years later, in 1942, in March of 1942. It's on the front page of the newspaper, the local newspaper. I have the article at home. Blackout baby. The night that she was born, there was a car accident in Bartonsville which knocked out the power. And she was born by candlelight. She also, the doctor put her in the oven. They lit up the oven and for warmth. And we've always told her she's half-baked, my half-baked sister.
Were you there at the birth? Did you?
No. Same doctor delivered me in 1930, and then Joni in 1942, Dr. George D. Zahner. In those years, the 30s, the town had two town doctors, Zahner and Dr. Cates. Now there are none. Of course, you have the emergency centers. Let's see.
What were your parents' names?
My parents' names were Kip Clifford Werkheiser, who once he found a steady job during the war years, delivering milk for Monroe Dairy.
Yeah.
He worked from Monroe Dairy until the owner bought in Stroudsburg what is now Friendly's, and that was Monroe Dairy. And then Bill Kramer sold that, and Dad moved over to Monroe Co-op. So he worked as a milk driver until retirement.
Did the Werkheisers go back in Pocono?
Yes.
Or?
They moved, oh, do they ever. The descendant came across in 1752, came into Philadelphia and walked up to Easton, Forks Township actually, and married. His wife came across with him, but they were married here. Mm-hmm. The thing I most remember about Karl Heinrich was he made the front page newspaper also. He murdered his wife in 1780. He beat her to death with a horse collar. And then in the following summer, he was publicly hanged in Easton Square. And that's the start of the Werkheisers, and we've been going downhill ever since.
Well, I know you've been to college because you were a teacher.
Yeah.
Did your dad and mom, did they have any form? Did
No,
they
I'm
graduate high school?
the first person, the first child on either side, the Werkheisers or the Martins, which was my mother. I'm the first person to ever attend college. And my sister then was the second. Now the reason was my dad was the first one to graduate from high school, because in his early teens he moved from the Werkheiser farm into Tannersville with the Sebring family. His buddy was Walter Sebring, who was the county superintendent after John Litz. And Walter Sebring convinced him of the worthiness of getting an education and being different. So Dad graduated from high school.
Which was unusual at the time.
Yeah. Those years of the 30s also, and the 40s, I remember some distinct characters, what I'd call characters of my youth. You don't find them around today much. Well, you see the homeless folks, but you don't find local characters. When you get old or funny in the head, we send them off to institutions and whatnot. In the old days, the families kept them. It was not unusual for 3 generations to be living in the same house. Frequently 2 generations. So they were tolerated. The 3 that I remember were Looney Len Setzer, Cherry Valley Charlie Schiffer, and Ciderhead Ed Smith. Now Setzer was a reader's guy. He was loony. He's most noted for his decision to walk to Washington, not DC, but the state. And he took off and he made it to Chicago, walking. And Chicago, the authorities picked him up and sent him back in training. There's an article in the newspaper when he came back. They asked him, well, what do you think, Charlie? And he said, or rather, Len, he said, well, them folks out in Chicago ain't very friendly. They sent me back here.
Did he have a reason for doing this?
He's loony.
Just took off.
Hey, yep, today he'd been institutionalized.
Yeah.
Cherry Valley Charlie was born in Cherry Valley, and he too was a little bit off the rails. Back then, up until 1950 or so, towns always had picnics, usually sponsored by the church. At every town, whether it's Tannersville, Readers, Scott Run, Swiftwater, there was the town picnic. You would always find Charlie there singing up a storm. And to keep him singing, I remember I would also buy him an ice cream cone or something, and he'd sing up crazy songs, but Cherry Valley Charlie. And the one of those 3 that I most remember is Ciderhead Ed, because he was my great-grandfather, Ciderhead Ed Smith. And called Ciderhead because everybody in Tannersville knew him. And he'd knock on the door and, could I have a sip of cider? Because back in the 30s and 40s, cider was a basic commodity in the homes. From there came vinegar and whatnot. But everybody knew him, so they'd say, sure, Charlie, come on in. So he'd go from house to house, cider.
Okay.
How was that when the road, the 3-lane road went through in 1943, which was an engineering disaster because who belonged in the center lane? Charlie said, I. So he'd walk the center lane. And the cops would bring him home to grab him. Yeah, but he'd do it again. Or he'd walk through the woods from the farm into Tannersville. And if he didn't come home at night, Grammy would send my Uncle Stan to the path, and he'd find him sleeping in the woods somewhere. But these were the type of characters that we don't have anymore because they're put away.
What high school did you go to?
Pardon?
What high school did you go to?
Okay. I'm a 1948 graduate of the old Pocono High School. My dad graduated from Pocono in 1928. I graduated in 1948. My sister graduated in 1960. And of course,
High School, I'm sorry, where was that?
it closed in 61. You know where the pond is in Tannersville?
Oh, the old Tannersville Learning Center was called?
Yeah. It
That was
closed
high
in 61 and became an elementary center
Okay.
when the
All right.
jointure was built. And lasted till 1987 or so, when on Warner Road they built an elementary school near the Jackson Township line, up near the Votech, or not Votech, but the community college.
Okay.
And then of course in 2000 it burned. It was destroyed by fire. Yeah, my high school, from grade 1 through grade 12, I stayed in the same building. Just moved on up the hallway. There were 29 in my class, of which 6 of us are still left. There were, at the old Pocono High School, 37 years of graduations, a total of 728 graduates in 37 years. By comparison, today's Pocono jointure graduates that much in 1 year. The first class was 1925, and there were 5 graduates, and the last class was 61.
You did pretty good in school apparently, because you went on, where'd you go to college?
Well, first of all, pretty good. Yeah, I think if there was a ranking, I was probably ranked about 20th of 29. You know, to say I graduated 20th in my class, that sounds good. And then when they asked, well, how many were there? Oh, there were 29. But my main interest was not studies, and it was sports and music and girls. I probably dated every one of the girls in my class over the time. Music with the band and the chorus. Sports in particular, I played varsity baseball for 5 years. Started in 8th grade as a starter. Basketball, I was a regular in 4 years, 9th grade through. My biggest memory was 1947. We were undefeated, and in the old Monroe County League, which was 6 schools at that time, Barrett, Coolbaugh, Tobyhanna Township, Chestnut Hill, Polk, and Pocono. We were league champs, and the umpire at one of the games was Walt Stem, who was a teacher and the coach of the East Stroudsburg team. And when I remember when the game ended that he was umpiring, he said to me, "You guys think you're pretty good, don't you?" I said, "Well, yeah. How about coming down and playing my team, East Stroudsburg High School?" So this was billed as the Monroe County Championship game, played under the lights at the old Gordon Vehicle Field, which no longer exists. And we beat him.
Okay.
We beat him.
Yeah.
We beat him good. Yeah, those were
Now I know you have some things.
My sister. Oh, okay, yeah. My sister Joan was born in 42. Okay. Then from there, I went to East Stroudsburg College. I had to take SAT tests because in those days, if you ranked in the upper half of your graduating class, you were automatically into the college. I was in the bottom half of my class, so I took the test, and 4 years there. It cost my dad $1,000 for 4 years for books and tuition. Compare that today to what would be $25,000 or more for 4 years, but it was less than $1,000. I hitchhiked frequently from Tannersville down to classes. Again, 4 years of varsity baseball there. And then from there, what happened that year? Oh, okay. After graduated in May, and in June then, I'm down in Tennessee playing professional baseball in June of 1952 at Union City, Tennessee, which was a Brooklyn Dodger farm team.
Okay.
But I had a wonderful year down there. And then unfortunately, Uncle Sam, I got a letter from Uncle Sam late that summer. And drafted, almost wasn't drafted. Always had poor vision, and they tested me 4 times because my vision was so poor, but they finally decided, well, let's send him off. I was one of 4 graduates to complete the, well, it was basic training, and 4 of us were college graduates. 57 of them, the other 57 were sent to Korea in 1952. We 4 were called in and asked where we wanted to go. Well, we all said, well, we don't want to go to Korea, okay? Well, where do you want to go? 2 of them, one of them stayed on in the cadre at Fort Pickett, Virginia. 2 of them went out to Las Vegas to the nuclear sites. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'd like to go to Germany. Okay, so off to Germany. And my kids used to ask me, what did you do during the war, Daddy? Well, I played baseball 2 summers and then basketball in the winter in Munich, Germany, and in Frankfurt, Germany. And yeah, that was the most intense baseball I've ever played. There were some of my opponents included major leaguers who were drafted. Kenny Boyer, who was third baseman with the Yankees. Carlton Willie, who was a pitcher for the Milwaukee Braves. There was a catcher. I don't know, but it was that was my war.
Well, no, when you say intense, it's all Americans playing Americans, right? I mean, there's no political stuff going on there with other countries. I mean, when you say intense, you mean that you had some serious ball players playing. Is that what you mean by intense?
Well, every base in Germany had a baseball team and a basketball team. We would travel down to Africa, to Libya, to play games. Down to what's that place down in France there, where the famous resort where all the millionaires go?
Riviera? Monte Carlo? I'm not a millionaire, so I don't know. Monte Carlo.
Yeah. Yeah, and we played down there. I came home, and my baseball career ended then at age 39. I played locally. I must speaking of war, an incident I always remember, Pearl Harbor Day.
I was going to ask you, you were about in 6th grade, 5th grade, something?
I was 11 years old.
All right.
And it was Sunday, and we always over to Grammy Martin's for Sunday dinner.
Mm-hmm.
The family would always go back, and that's where the radio announced. And I remember walking up the lane, and there was a plane flying over, and I ran into the woods to hide, thinking, I bet that's a Japanese plane. But that was, and then the war years in school, I vividly remember the air raid drills we had in high school and the blackout curtains.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing at night, no athletics. We would just intramurals because you had no traveling. My dad was classified 4A, exempt from draft, because he drove a milk truck, and that was deemed essential in the area. So he didn't serve. Of course, I got caught then in '52, which incidentally is the only 2 years I've ever been out of Monroe County.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep. I was happy to get back.
Can I ask you a question about the war, World War II? What was it like?
Okay, my recollection was that it was glamorous.
The war was glamorous?
Yeah, as a kid, because no television, radio, and all the radio announcements were encouraging, which was deliberate. They didn't want apparently they didn't want the Americans to be panicking. But I would go out and play soldier as an 11, 12-year-old kid. I'd go out in the woods with a stick or something and shoot the Germans, but there was nothing frightening. Unlike, let's say, Vietnam, where the war is right in your living room now, which, of course, everybody, there were no big protests in World War II nor Korea, because we didn't realize how horrible war was. And the comic books were war heroes, and all that kind of stuff. Everything was glamorous. It wasn't until Vietnam with television that how horrible war can be, and that's when the protests and it's just a far different thing. And then you think back to World War I, how glamorous that was to the Native Americans. All the wonderful songs they sing, and television changed that all for Vietnam. Yeah. Well, other things I remember from back in the 30s and 40s. Every town had a band. I know in World War I, before World War I, there were 30 bands in Monroe County. Every town had a band, and they didn't do concerts. Their primary purpose was the town picnics, church picnics. my band was the Glenwood Hall Band, which 1887 through 1943, and when it finished. And I'm happy to say I'm the last living member of the old Glenwood Hall Band, which folded in 1943. I was 13 years old when I joined the band.
What did you play?
I played the trumpet. I still have that trumpet at home. Dad bought it for me he bought it from Fred Werkheiser, a Tannersville native, for $5. Fred, he preferred the picnics to get drunk. He didn't want to be playing in the band. Another character. Yeah, every town had the one that had the most intriguing name was I got it down. Oh, hey, Musical Mountaineers of Spragueville. Of course, Spragueville became Anne Arundel then, but in those days, Musical Mountaineers of Spragueville. Yeah, we had the Glenwood Hall Band. My granddad played the bass drum. My dad played baritone. He was a wonderful musician. And I never played at an engagement because I practiced with him in the spring, getting ready. I still have Dad's uniform at home, which was purchased in the fall of '42. And they broke up in '43. They thought, although when the war ends, we'll get together, but never happened. Also, another thing about every town had a baseball team in the summer. Oh, incidentally, with the bands, there were prior to World War I, there were at least 30. In everybody had one. Water Gap had one.
Yeah, I know they had one. Yeah, we have pictures of it.
Yeah, the Glenwood Hall Band. But the town baseball teams also. Every town had a baseball team.
And you played other towns?
Yeah, there was the old Pocono Mountain League, which functioned until 1963. But Tannersville had a team, and Bortonsville had a team, and Readers had a team, and Appensville had a team, and Swiftwater had a team. Everybody had a team. And like with the bands, today there's one band, Centennial, in the whole county.
Yeah.
Baseball, there's no town team anymore. Now Legion, okay, but as far as adult, there is none anymore.
Why do you think that is?
Golf took over with the adults. Golf took over, and that's even waning now.
Yeah.
When you consider the number of golf courses in Monroe County alone that have closed, there are at least a dozen. Myrtle Beach, you used to go to Myrtle Beach, the golf capital of America. They had 110 courses down there when I used to go down. Now they're down to 80. The young people, well, they're not playing baseball, they're not playing town bands, they're not golfing, they're twiddling with their thumbs on their cell phones and what have you. Yeah.
Speaking of cell phones, Jim, can I ask you a question about When did you mentioned radios before when we were talking
Yeah.
about Pearl Harbor. Do you remember when television entered your life? What was that?
Yeah, I do. It didn't enter my life till after I got married.
What year was that?
I was married in 1957. Living at home, never had television. Now, after World War II, there was television. Dad would take me over to the local bar room to watch the Friday night fights.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a non-drinker too, but he would drink soda, and I'd drink soda in the local bar room. But there was no television until after. I think it was and then it was not till 1960, when my wife and I moved to Moses Creek to our home. We rented homes for 3 or 4 years after marriage, and we got a television set. So it was probably 1960 till I was with television.
So did you move to Marshall's Creek because it was closer for work?
No, it was actually further away.
Further?
We lived in Craig's Meadows first, then moved down to Menacing Hills, and then from there, all the way up to Morse's Creek. Yeah. Also, I wanted to mention something from bygone days, the outdoor movie theaters, which was a big form of entertainment. The ones I attended were in Saylorsburg, which is the flea market now. A second one was in Bartonsville, where the giant market is located now, in Bartonsville. And the third one was Trox Pocono Hotel. Every Friday night, they had a big screen outdoors, and they'd show movies, primarily for their customers. But we kids would sneak in. And I don't know if you know it, but on the back side of the screen, the image is upside down.
Oh, I didn't know.
It actually, because we couldn't go up with the client, the customers, we'd go in the yard and behind the screen and watch it upside down. We stood on our heads for, but those are long gone now. I think there's only 2 or 3 in the whole state of Pennsylvania that still exist, outdoor movies. The Flood of 55. Living in Tannersville. That night, when everything broke loose, we were asleep. We had moved into our new home in 1949. I was 19, so I spent a year teaching. After I came out of the Army, a year teaching at the old Jackson Township School, which was 3 rooms for 8 grades. I taught everything, all subjects to grades 6, 7, and 8.
Interesting. I want to hear about that, but you were in the middle of another story, so.
Yeah, 6, 7, and 8, which was, I lived that year with the encyclopedia, because I was a phys ed graduate from East Stroudsburg. Now suddenly I'm teaching algebra, geography, English. It was a mess. I left after 1 year and came down to the college and GI Bill just to take anything, because I could make more with the GI Bill than I could working for that summer. So I took driver's education. And lo and behold, I was the only adult in the class. I was 25 or 26. The rest were 19, 20-year-old. So Howie Denike said, hey, Ralph Burroughs needs a driving instructor down at East Stroudsburg High School. Because I was going to go back in the Army and go back and play baseball for a few more years. So I went down, and lo and behold, I ended up at East Stroudsburg High School. And while waiting to be interviewed by Ralph Burroughs, his secretary, and I hit it off. 2 years later, we're married.
Yeah.
So
But you started talking about the flood of 55.
Yeah, the
You
flood of
were-
55.
Yeah.
That night, our old hound dog, who was tied outside, was barking all night long. We couldn't figure out why. When we get up in the morning, we realized why. The flood. And our house here, the dog coop, and the dog over here, and in between was the water had gone down this driveway. The dog escaped, but boy, did we realize, well, that after the next day, this is interesting, the next day we went, I hopped in my car and drove into town because they're calling for help to clean up Stroudsburg. I got down here in the morning, down on South Main Street. They gave me a shovel with a lot of other guys and said, now you wait. I sat there waiting 5 hours, never called upon to do anything. So I dropped my shovel and came home. I wanted to volunteer, but there were too many people. A similar incident happened with my fire company. When I was 21, I went to join, because the fire companies, that was the big social thing in Tannersville. They wouldn't take me because they had too many. Now all companies are begging, but it's just a different world now. But that flood, I was not affected. I had finished my year of teaching at Breeders, finished my course at the college, signed on to teach at East Stroudsburg, and then in October, the school opened up that year, because up until October it was an emergency center because it had radio in the building in the old high school. And then in October I started working, stayed there 38 years and retired. Transportation. I remember 1943 when the 3-lane route for 611 went through. My dad worked part-time there, and I also got a job at age 13 with old Webb Heller. He had a great gas station, and he had a truck, and he would deliver soda to the workers on the highway. helped with that business. Let's see what else there was about. Yeah, 1963. 1963, the Route 80 went through. And really, Monroe County, everything changed when Route 80
Talk
was.
about that.
Everything changed. The population in 1960 of Monroe County was 39,000. Today it's 165,000. The population in Pocono Township in 1960 was 1,500. Today it's 12,000. I think the two things that have most changed in my 90 years is the population. When I was born, Pocono Township population was 1,150. Today, it's 12,000. Monroe County population when I was born was 28,300. Today, it's 167,000. Also of interest, as you drive from Tannersville to this light, when I was born, there was not one stoplight. Matter of fact, up to World War II, there was not one stoplight. Now there's 13 as you drive from Tannersville down. And I think the second thing that has changed is the demographics. The so-called minority population. It's incredible when you think about how ignorant I was of black race, Hispanics, and so forth and so on. Tannersville High School, 37 years, 738 graduates, not one black. I went to college, 4 years up here, graduated in 1952, 207 of us, one black. I went down south, played baseball, 8 teams in the old Kitty League, 15 guys on a team. That's roughly 120 guys, not one black. So I was totally ignorant of minorities until I was drafted. Suddenly, my God, it's a different world. But that's a dramatic change. So the total population and the demographics. Other than that, it's been a good life, and it's a good life now. I often hear people, particularly elderly people, talk about, oh, I don't know where the time goes. I now know where it goes. Thinking of the past. I probably spend my waking hours, let's say 12 hours a day, I probably spend 3 or 4 hours of that just thinking of the past. And as I'm thinking of the past, the present gets away from me. But that's so typical. A second thing that old timers talk about are the good old days. I think really what they're talking about are not so much events or situations, but their own ability to do those things and situations which they can no longer do. Therefore, the old days were good because no matter how simple things were, I could do them. And also, in the good old days, you're looking ahead to the future.
Interesting. Yeah.
As you get old, here I am 91, I ain't got much to look forward to anymore. But in my 20s and 30s, I had a whole life to look forward to, which was good and exciting. But really, with my actual life, today is better than the good old days, even though I can't do much of anything.
Well, when you were talking about living without any heat in that apartment above the garage and frozen water in the sink in the morning, that doesn't sound appealing.
Yeah, that alone, you know.
By the way, did your parents have a car then? Was it the kind of thing that most people owned cars?
Yes. Dad had a car. He always had a car.
Isn't that funny? As poor as some people could be, they always managed to have a car.
Yeah. Yep, he did. My first car was when I came out of the Army. My discharge bonus, I paid $800 for a car.
Okay.
An old 1948 Chevy. For $800. Now a used car of 6 years of age, $25,000. But everything's relative.
Yeah.
My first job, teaching, $2,700 was it. I never thought I'd see 5 figures, because in those days it was a state mandate, $200 a year. Well, I'm at $2,700. To get to $10,000 is $7,300, or 37 years. I'll never make it. But then when unionism came in, so I left at over 50,000, so, which was far better than the good old days of 2,700, for sure.
But there is a sense, as you say, that there is a sense that people think the good old days, it was better then. But as you say, when you look at the reality, not so much.
No, well, it's selective.
Selective
memory.
Yeah. But let's talk about that. Remember that photo we were looking at before
Yeah.
What was it like to come downtown? I mean, was it exciting? Did you come down on a certain day of the week?
It was scary to come down to the big city of Stroudsburg. Really scary.
Why?
And rarely did I come down.
What was scary about it?
Big city. I didn't know anybody. I knew everybody in Tannersville. Every baby, every grandparent, I knew everybody. I didn't know anybody down here. The only things I would come down for, well, in high school, I'd hitchhike down to watch either Stroudsburg or East Stroudsburg play football. Usually, I was brought down by my Uncle Stan. Uncle Stan's, one of his favorite watering holes was over at the Eagle Valley Hotel, which is now Eagle Valley Corners. The hotel is gone. But he would drive down on a Saturday and spend the whole day drinking. And then I would go to the football games. Yeah. I saw the first ever Turkey Day game. I'm probably one of the very few people alive that saw the first Turkey Day game and the last, and most of them in between.
Did you come into town to go shopping, like for clothes shopping or anything, or could you get that in Tannersville?
Tannersville stores. We had a couple of stores up there.
What were they?
Learn's General Market, which was right there at the corner of 715 and 611 as you're coming from Henryville. There's a kind of blank space. That was Learner's General Store. Yeah.
Well, you talked about the movies, and what was it like when there was, why was such a big crowd? We were looking at that photo of the big crowd in front of the theater.
Well, no television, no such thing yet.
So the street would be full of people
coming out. Yeah.
coming out of the theater.
Yeah, and there were 4 theaters in town in the 30s. The Sherman, the Grand, the Plaza, and Stroud. Now, of course, the Grand is still there, Pocono Cinema. The Plaza was where the present ESSS Bank in East Stroudsburg is.
Oh, okay.
The Stroud is a blank space on 6th Street. Yeah, as you drive back 6th Street, it's a blank lot there now. But there were 4 at that time.
Did you go to Wyckoff's?
Yep. Yep. In the later years, Wyckoff's and Sears. Sears was downstairs, and Wyckoff's was upstairs. Well, Wyckoff's was main and upstairs, yeah. But I'd come into town also occasionally to go to the YMCA Friday night dances, just to look, because I was too scared to ask a Stroudsburg girl. I was too afraid to even ask for dance. So it was an interesting too. My buddies, when we were in high school, much of your time was talking about girls or dreaming about girls. And they all said, they're never going to get married. We're just going to chase girls. I said, I'm going to get married. Every one of them got married before me. I was 27 before I married. They were all married by 21 or 22, but they were never going to get married, and I was going to get married. I could never find anybody.
So you met that secretary.
Yeah.
How many kids do you have?
4 sons. The twins are 63. Number 3 is 62, and my baby is 56.
Well, you've had a full life, certainly. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or anything else we should have asked you about today?
It's been a wonderful life. It's been I've always said life is good. I only ever really had one setback in my entire life, and that's when my wife died. She was too young, 59. God, that's 32 years ago, yeah. But other than that, everything just fell into place. And my hope is to get a letter from the president for the 100th birthday. Yeah, you can get citations from the President of the United States.
How about that?
On your 100th birthday.
Well, I'd like to see that letter when you get it.